First of all, actually a disclaimer. It would be wrong for me to suggest these are MTR's views, and equally inappropriate for me to suggest that these are RDG station and strategy views. They are very much personal views, and I think in order to get, hopefully, a great discussion going, some of them will be a little bit prodding and controversial. So let's see how we go. But I will just put in context, if I may, MTR, because I think as many of you will know, there is a similar heritage to one that Rob has described as a property development company. There is a similar heritage within MTR of bringing together railway development and place. MTR, as many of you will know, originally Hong Kong based, actually set up by British Railways engineers going back in time. We're one of the world's integrated railways. A lot of talk at the moment about perhaps reintegrating railways. So we build, operate, maintain, develop railways. But right from the word go, it's been more than just railways. It's been about building the communities of Hong Kong as they have developed, and actually now going back in time and re-intensifying the development above and around those stations. We're quite a big operator. We're a very intensive operator. We carry more people than the entire UK rail network, more than London Underground on what is a much smaller network every day. In Hong Kong, we do achieve high standards of performance. And as much as others have said tonight, we're also very focused on the other aspects of quality delivery that go with that. What do we do in Europe? Just very quickly. We are the operator for Crossrail, for TfL as our client, currently operating as TfL Rail. We were the operator jointly for London Overground for TfL. We're also involved jointly with First Group in South Western Railways in that franchise that many of you have struggled with tonight. We are turning South Western Railways and will improve the performance of that over the next 18 months. We also have a big business in Scandinavia. Some of you perhaps less familiar with. We run the underground system in Stockholm, a big commuter railway system in and around Stockholm, and we set up an open access, a competitor to the national operator running between Stockholm and Gothenburg. And as I've said, we absolutely have always put stations at the heart of the community and have always come about them, designing them as part of a wider development. To some extent, we've had, if I say the luxury, in a way that Rob, in squeezing what is to go on to Euston right now, does not. We've had the luxury in some areas of building on brownfield land or greenfield land and actually master planning. I mean, we're unusual probably as a railway company in having master planners and architects on our own payroll, not just brought in under consultancy. But in many cases now, as I said, we've had to undergo very complex extensions and building development over our existing facilities. We can all put up illustrations. I mean, that is a figurative, that's an illustration of one of our stations in Hong Kong. What I'm going to go through is very, very quickly. This is a piece of waterfront in Hong Kong that existed about 20 years ago. Some of you will know the harbour's actually got narrower and narrower in Hong Kong because the value of the land is such that you just infill now. The present waterfront has that building with one of our very big stations below it. Interestingly, there is a hotel that starts at floor 106 in that building. So you join a lift to get to reception and you emerge at floor 106. Such is the intensity and the value of the floors below it, that those are the floors that the hotel chose to take. That's therefore got office, check-in facilities for what is our ultimate service to the airport, a railway station, a very large bus interchange underneath, and a lot of residential around it. For some time now, we've seen the synergistic benefit of the flows of cash. Initially us investing, we do not take public subsidy in Hong Kong, so we have a constant cycle of cash flow where we are building at our own cost. These assets are on our balance sheet. We're investing, we build the railways, we take a long-term return, we take development profit, and that rolling cash flow is what sustains the MTR business and provides a payment obviously back to government. Let me come into the UK and let me present some thoughts about where we are in the UK. This is unfair, but I'm doing it to deliberately make a point. This is the same area, and we didn't compare notes tonight. This is the same area that many of us have been talking about tonight in and around King's Cross. I've lived in London for about 30 years on and off. I don't live there now. I know how, in many ways, sad the areas around King's Cross had become if you go back not that long in time. Why was that? And if we think about the heyday of railways, when they first came, these were grand places. But what became then dirty, coal, smoke, smog, actually our railway stations in many of our biggest towns and cities became the least attractive places to live and work. And in many cases, they were noisy, they became unattractive and run down. What has been that transformation? Well, some of it has been how the railways themselves have been transformed. By and large, these stations, not entirely, but by and large, they're being served by more and more electric trains. They're being served by more and more quieter trains. The very value that all of us have been talking about tonight, the value of ease of access, transport hubs and so on, has become something that we all, as users, and I use the transport system every single day, we all recognise, as much as Lord Adonis says, the ease of access and the interchange. And as a result, rental values, land values have risen. They were at a premium when the original railway stock companies were first floated. They were at a premium. They fell, and you could have bought property in these areas very cheaply not that long ago. Rents and values are now at a premium. And there's quite an interesting story. I went back and actually looked at when the St Pancras Hotel first opened. And these railway hotels, the British Railways hotels, were fantastic structures. The station opened in 1868. The hotel opened only a few years later, in 1873. But it closed because it became a place that people didn't want to be in 1935. It has reopened, and any of you know it. It is now a very expensive hotel in a premium place of land. King's Cross property in and around London is about £1,500 a square foot. Again, those values would simply not have been seen 15 years ago. But, and I said none of us compared notes before coming up here tonight, we absolutely suffer from a lack of clarity over strategic ownership of most, not all, but most of our station assets. And I applaud the way that some transport authorities are emerging and taking more, as it were, metaphorical ownership, if not physical ownership. And in the same way that others, and Lord Adonis has already complimented LCR, and I dare say the way that Lend-Lease will take forward Euston, there are others that are taking ownership of developing above and around stations. At a more prosaic level, a more practical level, many of us who are involved in railways will know that there's actually a frustrating overlap in some of just the practical day-to-day responsibilities for facilities management. Now that's at a very prosaic level, but it's there, it's leading to cost inefficiency, it's leading to a lack of focus in terms of the longer-term direction of those assets. If I was, again being controversial, I still think we have a long way to go in terms of the cost, the actual design of many of the facilities that we're still putting in stations. I do not believe we're spending money as cost effectively as we should do. And if you compare it with other urban assets, I don't think we stand up as well as we should do in comparison in terms of what is ultimately, in many cases, taxpayers' value for money. We do have to meet, though, ever-increasing sustainability and accessibility needs. You only have to look at all the profiles, all the forecasts that there are for who will be using our transport systems, whether they be longer distance or urban. There will be more and more those needing those kind of facilities and access to it as time goes on. We've also got very, very different priorities depending on whether you are the regular traveller going through the station or whether you are an occasional visitor, maybe just to another part of the country or maybe an inbound tourist, who knows. They're very, very different in how you would prioritise what you want from that facility. Whether you rush through it in the morning as the commuter, you know exactly where you're going. You need minimum in the way of information. But the occasional traveller needs an awful lot by way of signposting. I mean, I was trying to use another European country's railway for the first time recently. I was a stranger to it. I was going through all of the wayfaring for the first time and realising how difficult it is to actually find your way around and to figure out actually how even the train services work. But we've also got another huge change going on in terms of the art of the possible. These are very simplistic, but they're a way of trying to express something. In terms of wayfinding, we're kind of moving from map to app. You know, we all know we're all using devices in many cases to find our way around. And simply having the old map on the wall, which you will still find in a lot of stations, works for some people, but doesn't work for most of us. Customer information, again, it's a bit corny, but going from CIS to iOS. I mean, again, we're all using the power of the devices to be able to access ongoing information in completely different ways. And in ticketing, we're all absolutely simply as anxious and as keen as anyone to move from cardboard to smart card. I mean, the revolution that has to come, that TfL has achieved, not just through Oyster, but now through contactless, is what will drive convenience, what will drive usage in the railway. News stations. There have been some. It's remarkable how few. I mean, we were involved, we ended up operating for Transport for London, stations in East London, Hoxton, Shoreditch. Those stations have they've been part of assisting the regeneration in London by providing those facilities to parts of London that were poorly served. I live in Oxford. Oxford Parkway has saved people driving right the way into the centre of Oxford by allowing them to park right the way alongside a park and ride, is now opening up development to the north of Oxford in a way that wasn't happening before. It's very important that we focus on where we need new stations. If I was being very controversial, I think we have too many stations. In other parts of the country, we have 500 stations that have fewer than 50 users a day. Can we justify in value for money terms? In public expenditure terms, we're having to face the closure of valuable facilities like local schools, like local hospitals. If we think of a school and we try and compare a village school to a large secondary school, we call them both schools, but we have completely different expectations of the facilities. If you and I go into a Tesco Metro, it's a completely different facility than going into a superstore. And I think we have to get, if I'm honest, more and more serious about the value for money that we do want out of the station estate. Another aspect, and the Williams Review is looking in many aspects at track and train and how, as it were, either literally or metaphorically, we can join up the railway more effectively. Smart CIS, metaphorically, can join the railway up. If I'm on board a train and I want to order my taxi more easily or figure out where my connection is and where my connecting bus is or whether there's a bicycle waiting, Smart CIS can do an awful lot to connect track and train around our stations. So can better integrated facilities management in terms of smart management of our stations, whether it's energy management, whether it's providing remote monitoring of equipment, and even the one team operation that many are now moving to in our larger stations, where we've got different staffs who, from a passenger point of view, have to come across as more joined up and providing simply a better service to those moving through it. So we do have to have a greater clarity of purpose, but I see it as three purposes, and for any one station, whether one has in mind a very large station or, quite frankly, a very small halt, one has to look at these in very, very different ways. But every station has a catchment. Every station has a need for a community plan, whether the reality is that that is a sparse community or whether that is bursting out onto Marylebone Road. But every station has a community. Every station has to have a longer-term operational plan to meet the needs of the railway. How fast is that station going to grow? How fast is that catchment growing? How many people are going to use it? And in some cases, but obviously not all, and actually in truth in the minority, there is a development plan. There is, with land values rising, with the ability to bring together, sometimes land assembly, there is the opportunity for long-term asset and development. There is not, as we've heard from all of us tonight, there is not enough thinking going into how one creates that ownership of those issues across 2,500 assets. One can account for a small number of those relatively to the whole that are being looked at holistically by Network Rail, in some cases by other individual developers. But we do, as it were, owe it to our passengers and our communities to make judgments over who is going to be put into a leadership role in each of those aspects. Thank you.